The clang of hammers and the hiss of steam filled the air of Iron Vale Fortress every single day. I had spent the last 12 years here on the northern border fixing whatever the old machines decided to break. Water wheels that turned the grain mill's chain lifts, that raised the iron gates trebuchets that guarded the walls, and the stubborn boilers in the main forge that always seemed one spark away from exploding. My life was simple, loud and predictable. I lived alone in a small room behind the forge workshop, surrounded by the smell of hot iron, coal dust, and whatever cold meal I could throw together after the day's work ended. Every morning I woke to the same routine. I sharpened tools, checked pressure valves, and cursed at gears that refused to turn the way they were supposed to. I worked with my hands and years of stubborn experience. Machines didn't listen to orders, but they respected persistence and the right amount of swearing. The one person I worked with more than anyone else was Kara Vey. She was an orc engineer assigned to the same repair teams as me for the past 3 years. Tall even for her kind, with deep green skin, long black hair always tied back tight, and brass rings glinting in her ears. She carried a heavy slate board everywhere, scratching down measurements and calculations faster than most human scribes could write. She spoke little, but when she did, her voice was low and precise, every word chosen like a perfectly fitted bolt. We made a good team. I fixed things by feel and instinct. She fixed them by numbers and discipline. I would bang on a stuck gear and mutter, "Come on, you stubborn bastard, don't pretend you're broken." Kara would glance over completely serious and reply, "Gears do not pretend." I would laugh and say, "That's because you haven't been betrayed by enough of them yet." Sometimes the corner of her ear would twitch, the only sign I had ever seen that she found something amusing. I never thought much about it. We just worked well together. She always requested the same shifts as me. I figured it was because our styles balanced out. She never complained, never slowed down, and her calculations kept us from making expensive mistakes. That was all I needed to know. Then came the day the Great Northern Water Wheel jammed. The fortress commander sent us out at first light. That wheel powered the entire aqueduct system. If it stayed broken, the lower quarters, storehouses, stables, and the civilian barracks would lose their water supply and risk flooding when the spring melt came. We climbed the scaffolding along the cliff face tools, clanking on our belts. The wind whipped cold and sharp off the river below. I opened the main gear housing while Kara stood on the outer platform checking the support chains. Everything looked normal until I levered the inspection plate free. A rusted safety chain inside snapped with a sound like breaking bone. The entire wheel lurched. The platform shuddered violently. Kara was standing right at the edge. The force yanked her forward. Her safety line tore loose from its anchor with a metallic ping. For one terrible second she hung there, boots scraping on wet wood, nothing but roaring water and jagged rocks 30 feet below. I didn't think. I dropped the wrench, vaulted over the crossbeam, and grabbed the back of her tool belt with both hands. The momentum carried us both off the platform. My left hand clamped onto the iron frame at the last possible instant. My shoulder screamed as it took the full weight of 2 bodies. Pain tore through my ribs like fire. Kara looked up at me calm, even while dangling above certain death. "You should let go," she said. "Your survival chance is higher." "Shut up," I growled through clenched teeth. "I hate that kind of calculation." My arm burned. My shoulder felt like it was being ripped apart. But I pulled inch by agonizing inch. I dragged her back up until she could grab the frame herself. We collapsed onto the narrow ledge together, breathing hard. My left shoulder was torn open. 2 ribs were definitely broken. Blood soaked my shirt. Kara knelt beside me. For the first time in 3 years, I saw her hands tremble as she pressed a cloth to my wound. "Why did you not hesitate?" she asked quietly. "Because you were falling," I answered. It was the only reason that mattered. She stared at me for a long moment, yellow eyes searching my face as if seeing something entirely new. The wind howled around us. Far below, the river roared on, indifferent. From that day, Kara looked at me longer than before. I told myself she was simply worried about my injuries. I had no idea that in her orc culture, throwing yourself into danger without hesitation to save someone carried a far deeper meaning. It was the beginning of everything. The next 7 days were pure torture. The healer shoved me into the small infirmary room at the back of the fortress and told me I wasn't allowed to leave until the bones in my ribs stopped trying to stab my lungs. I hated every second of it. The bed was too soft, the blankets too heavy, and the silence without the constant clang of hammers made my skin itch. I spent most of the first morning trying to convince the healer I was fine. He just looked at the purple bruises spreading across my chest and laughed like I'd told the funniest joke in Iron Vale. Kara showed up on the second day and never really left. She sat on the wooden stool beside my bed with her slate board balanced on one knee, reading through the healer's notes like they were battle plans. Every few hours, she would stand, check the bandages on my shoulder, force another cup of bitter medicine down my throat, and write down how much pain I claimed I wasn't feeling. When I tried to swing my legs off the bed on the third morning, she put one large green hand on my chest and pushed me back down without effort. "You are not leaving this room," she said flatly. "I feel fine." I lied. "You lie worse than a rusted hinge," she replied, not even looking up from her notes. "Stay down, or I will tie you to the bed frame. I have spare rope." I believed her. She wasn't gentle about it. There was no soft voice or worried eyes. She cared for me the way orcs do, everything efficient, disciplined, and completely ruthless. She measured my fever 3 times a day, changed the bandages with movements so precise they felt mechanical, and threatened to sit on me if I tried to sneak back to the forge. Once when I complained that the bed was judging me, she answered without hesitation, "The bed is not judging you. It is simply keeping you from killing yourself before your ribs heal." I laughed, even though it hurt. Her ear twitched the tiny movement I had learned to recognize as amusement. One evening after the healer had left and the only light came from a single lantern, Kara set her slate aside. She looked at me for a long moment, yellow eyes steady. "What conditions do humans use when choosing a life partner?" she asked. I nearly choked on the thin porridge I was eating. "What I am researching, human behavior." I stared at her. Of course she was. Kara researched everything: gears, water pressure, the best angle to swing a hammer. "Why not marriage too?" I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and gave her the simplest answer I could think of. "I guess you have to get along. Trust each other. Be able to stand each other's bad habits." She nodded once and wrote it down the chalk, scratching loudly in the quiet room. I tried to make light of it. And they probably have to tolerate me talking to machines like they're stubborn children. Kara didn't even pause. "I have tolerated that for 3 years. I laughed again, but something in her tone made the sound feel a little hollow. She kept writing. Then she asked another question voice, still calm and serious. "Does it require that the person has saved one's life?" I blinked. "Not necessarily." She wrote it down. "Does it require that the person does not fear danger on one's behalf?" I shifted on the bed ribs, protesting. "It's not required, but it's probably a good thing." She was quiet for a long time after that, her ears lowered slightly, the brass rings catching the lantern light. I didn't know what that meant yet. Word of what happened at the water wheel had spread through the entire fortress by then. The other smith started teasing me whenever Kara wasn't around. "Saved her like you were saving your bride Holt," one of them called across the courtyard the day before I was finally discharged. Another laughed and added, "Careful, Darien. Orcs don't forget debts like that." I brushed it off as stupid jokes. Kara, I learned later, listened to every word. On the morning they finally let me out, she walked me back toward the forge. The air smelled like coal and hot metal again, and I felt half alive for the first time in a week. At the entrance to the workshop, I stopped and looked at her. "If you ever fall again," I said, "I'll still pull you up." Kara turned those sharp yellow eyes onto me. "Even knowing you could die." "Yeah," I answered without thinking. "You're my person in the workshop. I meant it the way teammates mean it. Someone you count on, someone who has your back." But the way Kara looked at me after I said it made my stomach do something strange. Her ears lifted slowly and she studied my face like she was memorizing every line. That was the moment she started preparing something I still didn't understand. She began making a list. Reasons I would make a suitable husband, proof of my character. A plan to ask me directly according to the strict customs of her clan. I had no idea. All I knew was that Cara Vey was looking at me differently now, and for the first time in 3 years, I felt like I might have missed something important. I had only been back at the forge for 3 hours when it happened. The southern lift bridge was jammed again, the massive iron counterweight refusing to rise. The workshop was packed smiths, hammering guards, hauling fresh coal apprentices, running messages, and the usual crowd of off-duty soldiers who liked to loiter near the heat. I lay on my back under the mainframe clevis wrench and hand grease and sweat stinging my eyes. My ribs still ached every time I breathed too deep, but lying still for 7 days had driven me half mad. I needed to work. Whoever designed this cursed thing clearly hated human spines, I muttered, banging the wrench against a stubborn pin. A pair of heavy boots stopped right beside my head. I slid out from under the frame, wiping my face with a rag, and looked up. Cara stood there. She wasn't holding her usual slate board. Instead, she carried a thick scroll of cured hide tied neatly with a bright red cord. Her expression was more serious than I had ever seen it, jaw-set shoulders, squared yellow eyes locked on me like I was the only thing in the entire fortress. The brass rings in her ears caught the glow of the forges. I sat up, cracking my skull against a crossbeam. Ow, damn it. Cara, you need something. Another broken gear. She didn't answer right away. She simply waited until the nearest hammers fell quiet and enough eyes had turned our way. Then she spoke, voice clear and carrying across the entire workshop. Darian Holt, I have observed you for 3 years. The forge went dead silent. I stared at her still half on the ground. A few apprentices froze mid-step. One guard's tongs clattered to the floor. Cara continued completely unfazed. You are competent. You are loyal. You show patience with machines that do not deserve it. And 3 weeks ago you risked your life without hesitation to save mine. She untied the red cord with steady fingers and unrolled the hide scroll. It was covered top to bottom in her precise, angular handwriting. She began to read aloud. You keep your promises. You do not abandon your comrades. You endure pain without complaint. You know how to repair a home. You can eat orc stew without whining. You are not afraid of a woman who is stronger than you. Someone behind me whispered, That last one is rare. My mouth had gone completely dry. Cara rolled the scroll. Halfway, looked straight into my eyes and asked the question that stopped the entire workshop dead. What must I do to marry you human? The silence was so complete I could hear the coals crackling. Then she added voice, ringing clear and calm, I truly want him. A young apprentice dropped his hammer. It hit the stone floor with a loud clang that seemed to echo forever. The workshop exploded, shouts, laughter whistles, and at least one person yelling, finally burst out all at once. Someone started clapping. Another person shouted, Take the scroll. Holt, she wrote it down. I sat there on the dirty floor grease on my face, ribs screaming, staring up at the 7-foot orc woman who had just proposed to me in front of 50 witnesses using a technical report. Cara, my voice cracked. Are you proposing to me right now? In the middle of the forge, she tilted her head slightly. Yes, this is where we are most compatible. I pressed both hands to my face. I need to sit down. You are already sitting, she pointed out. I groaned. Cara watched me. When I didn't answer immediately, her ears lowered a fraction. She began to roll the scroll back up, movements careful and deliberate. I understand, she said, her voice still steady but now carrying a drier edge. Humans require more conditions. I will not pressure you. No, wait. I scrambled to my feet, nearly tripping over my own wrench. That's not what I meant. I've never been proposed to with a written report before, in front of the entire damn forge. A smith 2 benches over called out helpfully. Honestly, the report was pretty convincing. I threw my dirty rag at him. Cara stood perfectly still, scroll half-rolled, waiting. Her ears were still slightly down. I had learned enough in the last few weeks to know what that meant. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only she could hear over the chaos. People like me don't usually jump straight to marriage. We start slower, with dinner, with time, with talking. She considered this for a moment, then nodded once, serious as ever. Dinner is step 1. I let out a shaky laugh. Yeah, step 1. Understood. She tied the red cord around the scroll again with neat, precise knots. I will begin the human courtship procedure immediately. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back at me over her shoulder. Darian Holt. Yeah, I am very patient when the goal matters. With that, she walked out of the workshop, scroll under her arm, leaving the entire forge in uproar behind her. I stood there covered in grease and disbelief, heart hammering against my still healing ribs. For 3 years, I had thought Kara Vey simply worked well with me. I was starting to realize I had been very, very stupid. And my life was never going to be quiet again. The very next evening, Kara appeared at the door of my small room behind the forge, still wearing her work apron, but with her hair freshly braided and a faint scent of smoke and herbs on her skin. Dinner, she announced. Step 1, the Orc mess hall. Now. I didn't even have time to argue. She simply turned and started walking, clearly expecting me to follow. I did. The Orc section of the fortress mess hall was louder, hotter, and smelled infinitely better than the human side. Long tables, open fires, and the constant clatter of metal tankards. Kara led me to a corner table that had obviously been reserved. 2 plates waited. On mine sat a generous slab of spiced grilled meat, thick black bread still warm from the oven, and a tankard of honey mead that looked strong enough to knock out a horse. She sat across from me, back straight, ears alert. Boatoi nai ko jat teo chuan bok mot kong, she asked, using the exact words I had given her. I took one bite of the meat and nearly coughed from the heat. If I survive this mead, then yes, definitely step 1. She watched me eat with the same focused intensity she usually reserved for broken gear ratios. Every time I reached for the bread, she pushed the best piece toward me. When a cold draft came from the open door, she shifted her body to block it without saying a word. At one point, she took my knife, tested the edge with her thumb, then silently sharpened it on a small stone she had brought with her before handing it back. It was all so Kara, practical. Direct, utterly without pretense. And suddenly I was seeing 3 years of the same behavior in a completely different light. She had always changed shifts to match mine. She had always known exactly when I forgot to eat and left an extra ration on my workbench. She had always laid out the exact tools I would need before I asked. She had always stood on the dangerous side of the machine so I wouldn't have to. I had thought she was simply the best partner I had ever worked with. Now I understood she had been quietly choosing me for 3 years. I set my tankard down. Kara, you've been doing all of this for a long time, haven't you? She met my eyes without hesitation. Yes. Why didn't you say anything? Humans require time, she said simply. And I am patient when the goal matters. I didn't know what to say to that. The next few days blurred together in the strangest way. Kara began her human courtship procedure with ruthless efficiency. She mended the straps on my tool belt when they frayed. She left perfectly portioned meals in my locker with little notes written in her precise handwriting, "Eat before ribs hurt again." When we worked outside on the walls and the wind cut like knives, she positioned herself so her larger body blocked the worst of it for me. Every action was Orc straightforward. No coy glances, no flirting the way human women did, just steady, deliberate care. And every time I tried to explain that humans usually needed time to fall in love, she would listen, nod, and reply in that calm voice. We Orcs also fear being wrong. We simply do not pretend we do not want something. Those words kept echoing in my head. The rest of the fortress, of course, had plenty to say about it. Some of the smiths clapped me on the back and laughed. Others muttered behind my back. In the mess hall one evening, a young human guard loud after too much ale sneered just loud enough for the whole table to hear, "Darian's gonna have to ask permission before he even breathes once he marries that Orc." The table went quiet. I set my cup down slowly. My ribs still ached, but I looked the guard straight in the eye. "If I marry her," I said, voice low, but carrying it will be because I'm smart enough to choose the person who stands beside me when everything is about to break apart. Not because I need permission to breathe. The guard blinked suddenly sober. No one else spoke. Kara, sitting beside me, said nothing, but her ear twitched once the small sign that meant more than any smile. Later that same week, the western gate mechanism failed. A heavy merchant caravan was rolling in when the massive iron portcullis jammed halfway down. The counterweight chain snapped. The entire gate, several tons of iron, began to fall. Kara moved first. She sprinted across the courtyard and threw herself into the narrow maintenance shaft beside the gear housing, trying to lock the emergency brake. I saw the danger instantly. The secondary gear train was still spinning. Kara, wait. Too late. The gears caught her arm. She grunted in pain but kept pushing the brake lever with her shoulder, trying to stop the gate from crushing the merchants below. I didn't hesitate. I dropped my tools and dove into the tight space after her. Metal groaned around us. The gate was still descending. I could feel the vibration through my bones. "If you're planning to marry me," I shouted over the screech of metal, "you're not allowed to die before our second dinner, even trapped and bleeding." Kara answered in that perfectly calm voice. "That is a reasonable condition." I laughed like a madman and reached past her to yank the final release pin. The gate shuddered to a stop, 3 feet above the ground. The merchants below cheered. We were both bleeding her arm, my reopened shoulder, but we were alive. The healers found us later, still wedged together inside the machinery like two idiots who refused to let the other die first. As they carried us back to the infirmary side by side, I finally understood something I had been too slow to see for 3 entire years. Kara Vey had not been standing next to me because we worked well together. She had been standing next to me because in her own quiet, relentless orc way she had already chosen me long ago. And for the first time, I was starting to realize I didn't want her to stop. The gears screamed like living things as the western gate began its final descent. Kara had already thrown herself into the narrow maintenance shaft shoulder, wedged against the emergency brake lever. The secondary chain was whipping wildly. One wrong move and the entire portcullis, several tons of iron, would crush the merchant caravan waiting below. I didn't wait for the rescue team. I dropped my tools and dove in after her. The space was barely wide enough for one person, let alone two. Metal scraped my back. My freshly healed ribs protested with white-hot pain. Kara's arm was caught between two spinning cogs, blood already slicking the iron. "Hold the brake," I shouted. She braced her boots against the wall and pushed with everything she had. I reached past her fingers slick with grease and blood and yanked the release pin free. The gate shuddered, groaned, and stopped 3 feet above the heads of the screaming merchants. For 3 long heartbeats we stayed there, locked together inside the machine, breathing hard. Then the pain hit us both at once. Healers found us still wedged in the shaft, like a pair of idiots who refused to let the other die first. They dragged us out cursing and carried us straight to the infirmary. The same healer who had kept me in bed for 7 days looked at the two of us lying side by side on adjacent cots and threw his hands up. "Two absolute fools," he muttered, stitching Kara's arm. "Made for each other clearly." I looked across at her, blood on her cheek hair coming loose from its braid yellow eyes still sharp despite the pain. I started laughing. It hurt like hell, but I couldn't stop. "Sounds like a blessing to me," I said. Kara, completely serious even while the healer worked on her, replied, "If that is the case, we should record witnesses." The healer just shook his head and left us alone once the worst of the bleeding was stopped. The room grew quiet. Only the soft crackle of the lantern and the distant sounds of the fortress settling down for the night remained. Kara turned her head toward me on the pillow. "Do you still require additional steps in the human courtship procedure?" she asked. I looked at her for a long moment. No jokes this time. No dodging. "Yes," I said. "One more step." She sat up a little straighter, ears lifting with attention. What step I took. A slow breath, ribs aching. The step where I admit I've been an idiot. Her ears twitched. I didn't see it. I continued. "For 3 years you stood right beside me. You changed shifts to match mine. You made sure I ate. You prepared every tool I would need before I even asked. You stood on the dangerous side of every machine so I wouldn't have to. I thought you were just the best partner I'd ever had. I didn't realize you had already chosen me." I swallowed. "But you were falling that day at the water wheel. And I didn't hesitate. Not because I'm brave, because the idea of losing you was worse than anything that could happen to me. And I don't want to fix another broken machine or live another day in this fortress if you're not standing right there beside me. Kara was completely still. The lantern light danced across her green skin and the brass rings in her ears. She stayed quiet for so long I started to worry. Then she spoke, voice low and steady. That is your answer to my question? I smiled, tired and honest. That's the answer that says yes. We start with dinner, we take the time humans need, but I'm not running anymore. I want this. I want you. She nodded once, slow and deliberate. Then we will continue with dinners, with time together, with whatever steps your people require. A pause. And I will not propose in the middle of the forge again. I laughed softly. Good. Maybe try the open courtyard next time. Her ear twitched again, that small, unmistakable sign of amusement. Noted. From that day on, the entire fortress knew. Some people clapped us on the back, others still muttered behind our backs. We didn't care. Kara still left the best tools on my bench. I still cursed at machines and made her ears twitch when I said ridiculous things. We worked side by side exactly as we always had, only now I reached for her hand when no one was looking and she let me. A few months later, on an ordinary afternoon in the same forge where everything had started, I waited until the hammers quieted for a moment. I pulled a small scroll of hide from my pocket. It was nothing fancy, just 3 short lines written in my own uneven handwriting. I handed it to her. Kara unrolled it slowly. Em lan goi toi tin. Em lan goi toi muon. Em lan goi toi sevekung. She read the words twice. When she looked up, her yellow eyes were bright in a way I had never seen before. This scroll lacks sufficient data. She said, voice thick, but the sentiment is complete. I grinned. I tried my best. She reached out large green hand, closing gently around mine right there in the middle of the forge in front of everyone who happened to be watching. The story had begun with her standing in the middle of the workshop and asking loud and fearless, "What must I do to marry you, human?" I had been terrified that day. Now I understood she had never been rushing. She had simply been waiting 3 long years of quiet observation. 3 years of standing beside me, and one moment when I threw myself into danger without thinking, because it was her. And I, the fool who used to talk to machines like they could answer back, had finally realized the woman who had always been right there was not just my partner. She was home. And if our forever had to begin with a very orc proposal in the middle of a noisy forge surrounded by grease and hammers and the smell of hot iron, then I wouldn't have wanted it any other way.